Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely staggering. We're going to examine history's deadliest accidental explosion. We're talking about a disaster that literally shook the earth, fundamentally reshaped an entire city, and completely rewrote the global rules of maritime safety. Today, we are looking at the Halifax Explosion. To really grasp the sheer magnitude of what we're talking about here, I want you to imagine a scenario. Imagine you're just standing in your kitchen on what feels like a completely ordinary morning. You're going about your routine, maybe pouring a cup of coffee. Then, absolutely out of nowhere, a blast rips through your city with such massive force that the shockwave violently shatters the glass right out of your windows. And here's the crazy part. You're standing 50 miles away from the epicenter. That is the kind of terrifying power we're dissecting today. Now, usually when we talk about blasts with this kind of city-leveling destructive power, our minds instantly jump to World War II, right, or the nuclear age. But this wasn't a wartime bombing. This was a sudden, completely unforeseen catastrophe in 1917, right in the Canadian city of Halifax. In a matter of seconds, it vaporized a ship and killed thousands. It was, quite literally, the most powerful man-made explosion before the atomic bomb. And the most chilling detail? It was entirely accidental. Let's start with part one, the busiest port in wartime. So, to set the scene, during World War I, Halifax wasn't some sleepy coastal town. It was actually one of the busiest shipping hubs in the entire world. Every single day, cargo ships packed to the brim with highly explosive ammunition were crossing the harbor. But, human psychology is a funny thing. We adapt. The citizens of Halifax had just grown incredibly accustomed to this heavy military traffic. People were so used to the daily sight of these floating arsenals that absolutely no one suspected one ordinary morning was about to become one of the darkest chapters in North American history. Which brings us to part two, the deadly collision. Picture the setup in the harbor that morning. The danger lurking there was immense. On one side, you've got an ordinary relief vessel. Totally routine, harmless, just carrying basic supplies. On the other side, you have the French cargo ship, the Mont Blanc, and its payload is terrifying. Thousands of tons of TNT, picric acid, and benzol. The Mont Blanc wasn't just a cargo ship. It was essentially a floating, unarmored bomb carrying enough volatile explosives to wipe a city right off the map. Now, it wasn't a dramatic high-speed crash. It was actually the slow, agonizing series of navigation mistakes in a congested harbor that finally led to a collision. The impact wasn't huge, but it was just enough to spark a benzol fire right on the deck of the Mont Blanc. And then the human element takes over. Unaware of the lethal cargo inside, curious crowds start gathering along the shoreline, just watching the spectacle of this burning ship. It is such a haunting image to think about. Those civilians standing shoulder to shoulder on the docks, completely mesmerized by the flames dancing on the water. They had absolutely no idea they were standing on the edge of oblivion. They were just watching a ticking time bomb counting down to zero. Let's move to part three, the 9:04 a.m. blast. Right at 9:04 a.m., time essentially stopped for Halifax. In the blink of an eye, the Mont Blanc just disappeared in a blinding ball of fire, and a catastrophic shockwave ripped outward, violently erasing the city's landscape. The physical force of this thing is almost impossible to wrap your head around. Entire neighborhoods were instantly flattened, just collapsing like houses of cards. And the destruction wasn't only in the air. The blast displaced so much water that a massive tsunami surged violently across the harbor. To give you a real sense of the kinetic energy here, a solid steel anchor from the Mont Blanc, weighing hundreds of kilograms, was picked up and violently thrown for miles. 3 kilotons. To put that into perspective, this explosion released energy equivalent to roughly 3 kilotons of TNT. Let that sink in for a second. Without a single nuclear atom being split, a simple human error unleashed the largest human-made explosion in history before the atomic age. Part 4. A city in ruins. The human toll was just staggering. We're talking over 1,900 people killed, many vanishing in a fraction of a second. Around 9,000 individuals were severely injured, their lives altered forever, and thousands more suddenly found themselves homeless in the bitter cold. Hospitals immediately overflowed, and they were just desperately struggling to treat the thousands of bleeding, displaced citizens wandering through the debris. But in the face of absolute nightmare scenarios, humanity really steps up. Rescue workers immediately raced into the burning ruins, And that was a grim task made exponentially harder when a fierce, unforgiving blizzard blanketed the shattered city the very next day. Yet, hope wasn't lost. As word of the catastrophe spread over the telegraph wires, vital aid, medical supplies, and volunteers quickly poured in from all across Canada and the United States. Finally, Part 5, The Modern Legacy. What's really fascinating is how the hard lessons learned from the 1917 devastation completely transformed global emergency planning, disaster response, and maritime shipping safety standards. Harbors simply could no longer operate with such lax oversight. And looking at the present day, there's actually a really beautiful, enduring tradition that came out of this. Every single year, the city of Halifax sends a magnificent Christmas tree down to Boston as a heartfelt thank you for the swift medical aid Massachusetts provided during those really dark days. When we strip away the massive statistics and the massive historical impact, we're left with this really stark reality. Ultimately, the whole shebang came down to one simple navigation mistake, causing one collision, which sparked one fire, which triggered one explosion, and an entire bustling city was changed forever. More than a century later, looking back at the 1917 Halifax Explosion serves as a dark but absolutely vital documentary of human fragility and incredible resilience. It really leaves us to ponder a haunting question. How can a single, seemingly small, unforeseen accident completely reshape the course of history? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.